Shadow Registeel is coming to Pokemon Go. Starting February 1st until February 5th, there's going to be a Team Go Rocket Takeover event, which is featuring some new Shadow Pokemon, such as Shadow Alolan Ninetales, which is pretty huge. Shadow Galvantula is also pretty enticing. But we're also getting Shadow freaking Registeel. There is a Registeel dev at Niantic. This I am certain of. Is it the same developer that's in the Claydol? I do not know. But in this video, I'm going to let you know just how good Shadow Registeel is in the Great League and Ultra League PvP, if you should spend Super Rocket Radars trying to get Shadow Registeel, and what some of the IVs you should look out for on your Shadow Registeel. You know, letting you know if you should pull for a second one or something to that effect, right? So at a base, Shadow Registeel really isn't that good of a Shadow Pokemon, you know, compared to its non-Shadow counterpart. When a Pokemon's a Shadow Pokemon, they get a bonus to their attack. And one tantalizing aspect of that is that it increases their charge move damage and their fast move damage. Because Registeel's fast move is lock-on, it doesn't get any extra damage for being a Shadow. It still does like 1 or 2 damage depending on the opponent's defense stat, and there are no tricky little attack breakpoints that will give you that 2 damage or whatever on your lock-on. So it's not that big of a deal for Registeel. When it comes to your charge move damage, it's only going up by like, you know, 10-ish%, right? So overall, not that big of a boon for Shadow Registeel. However, I still think Shadow Registeel, if you're into Great League or Ultra League PvP, you're very enthusiastic about it, is still worth a pull. Because at the end of the day, even though it is only like 7 to 10% more damage on your charge moves, if that is the extra damage Registeel needs to, you know, turn a 3H KO into a 2H KO or a 2H KO into an OH KO, or put the opponent into like a farm down situation where like normal Registeel wouldn't be able to farm them down because it didn't hit them that hard, that could make Shadow Registeel stand out. And I think that this is something that will be missed by a lot of the simulations, and that you'll find out as you play with Shadow Registeel and more people experiment with Shadow Registeel. But I think there will be team comps or metas, scenarios, where getting that extra charge move damage is significant for Shadow Registeel. So overall, I think that if you're really into PvP, you're really into the Great League or the Ultra League, Shadow Registeel is going to be worth at least 1 Super Rocket Radar. As far as stocking up and saving Super Rocket Radars for other Shadow Pokemon, I think future Shadow Pokemon that are legendaries, you know, Giovanni style, could be more valuable. They could get more out of the Shadow bonus. So I probably wouldn't spend more than 2 at best Super Rocket Radars on Registeel, because like, it is so niche where it can get an advantage. But as it stands, if you do want to pass this one up, yeah, you could pass it up and not really worry too much about it. But as the FOMO demon that is Pokemon Go exists in our life, you should probably get at least one if you're really into PvP. Another detriment to Shadow Registeel is the IVs. A Shadow Legendary Pokemon will have a floor of 666. Interesting. But because of that, you're always going to have a 6 attack stat. Now, having a bit of an attack stat isn't so bad for a lot of Pokemon, but for Shadow Registeel, who doesn't get fast move breakpoints, well, it's kind of useless, right? Like, why would you want to have that? You want to have more bulk on your Registeel. And then to add to that, you can't catch a whole bunch of these and trade a whole bunch of these. You can't even trade them at all. So what you get is kind of what you get. So if you get like the 15-6-6, well, good job, right? Like, you're gonna be missing some bulk points there, which is unfortunate. So what bulk points are you looking for on Registeel? Well, one that stood out in a pretty big way is having at least 130 HP. There's a whole bunch of matchups that you can flip with that, such as the Obstagoon 2-1 shield scenario, the Victory Bell 1-1 and 2-2 shield scenarios, the Lantern 0-0, the Air Slash Mandibuzz 0-1, the Pelipper 2-2, the Cofagrigus 2-2, and I think that's all I have written down here. But yeah, that's a lot of matchups. A big problem with 130 HP, though, is that there's only 17 IVs out of the 1,000 possible IV spreads that will have 130 HP. So it's a very high probability that you will not get that. From 1, 2, you could use 40 Super Rocket Radars, and you'd still very likely not get that HP. So it's worth keeping in mind if you do spend one, you're like, hey, this has really high HP. Ooh, it's got 130 HP. Ha 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 ha. Go me. Pat myself on the back. But if you don't get it, I really don't expect you to try to chase to get this either. When it comes to the defense, a really high in the sky defense breakpoint that's pretty significant is having about 190 defense for the Altaria matchup, taking one less damage from Dragon Breath after a Zap Cannon debuff, which is significant for the 1-1 shield scenario and other shield scenarios for Altaria in general. Yeah, Shadow Registeel will lose like very poorly against an Altaria in the 1-1 if it doesn't have a high defense stat. Now, this is against the rank 1 Altaria, so chances are you'll need at least 191.5 defense if you want to consider like the rank 7 Altaria, which is a nice mix between bulk and having a slight attack weight. But if you're up against the Trevenant Slayer Altaria from my Altaria PvP IV deep dive, link up above and description if you want to check that out. Yeah, no, Shadow Registeel will never be able to get this defense breakpoint unless it gets 2 Zap Cannon debuffs, which... good luck with that, buddy, right? So, yeah, and then when it comes to this high defense, I think we're only looking at like 16 or 18 different IV spreads that have this as well. So, very high probability that you won't have that high defense. But if you do pull it, and you happen to have a really high defense stat, then that is something interesting that could be unique to your Registeel. So about the average Joe Registeel, you know, the one that we're probably going to get. What are we looking for? And I find that about 183.28 defense and 125 HP is a pretty safe minimum. The defense is based off of the Swampert 0-1 shield scenario against a slightly attack-weighted Swampert of about 122.3 attack, which is pretty reasonable for a bulky Swampert to try to have, roughly, at best. And then the HP is based on the Walrein 2-2 and 0-0 shield scenario, but it also encompasses like a whole bunch of other matchups, such as the Shadow Alola Ninetales 1-2 shield scenario, among other things, right? So what are your chances of getting this Wombo combo here? Well, there are about 674 different IV spreads that meet those specifications out of 1,000. So you have a pretty high probability of getting this. Using one Super Rocket Radar, I think you have about a 70% probability of getting it. And if you don't get it and you spend a second one, then you have about a 90% probability of getting one with those stats there. So if you're already planning on spending 2 so you can have a Great League one and an Ultra League one, well, then you've got like, you're almost guaranteed. You're not guaranteed, but you're almost guaranteed to get a serviceable Registeel, right? And of course, having more HP will be nicer. Having a bit more defense can be nicer, but there's nothing of like major significance that stands out until you get to those super wacky high levels, which you probably won't get, so don't even worry about it. Now, what if you're of the unlucky 10% that spent 2 Super Rocket Radars and they did not get the minimum IVs that I recommended here for Shadow Registeel? Well, I'd live with it personally. I think Shadow Registeel is barely worth 1 Super Rocket Radar to begin with. So for me, I don't care about Ultra League at all. I just care about Great League. Even if I don't get the minimum IVs highlighted in this video, I'm probably just going to stick with the Shadow Registeel I happen to get, right? So I'm not going to spend 2 to begin with. If you're into the Ultra League and the Great League, you want 1 for each league, and you spend 2, but you don't get the good Great League one, I'd just live with it, honestly. Just keep the stat checks in mind. HP is generally going to be favored compared to the defense, you know, and just live with it. Spending the third one, I don't think Shadow Registeel is worth 3 Super Rocket Radars. I think that'd be a waste of it. So, yeah. Fortunately, Shadow Registeel isn't that meta, so it's not like, oh no, I'm missing out super bad. You know, it's not as good as other Shadow Pokemon are, so, It just is what it is, right? It's a defect of this game that Pokemon Go refuses to address. Whatever, right? And then if you're curious about Ultra League PvP IVs for Shadow Registeel, I am pretty strapped for time, unfortunately. Like, I haven't uploaded a video in over a week. I've been working all these extra shifts. I've been flip-flopping day shift and night shift for shift differentials and pickup bonuses so I can afford going to these regionals and I can afford my wedding. And so I've been really strapped for time. And I didn't have enough time to do an Ultra League analysis So I just go with the good IVs for your Great League one because I love Great League. I think Great League is the better and more competitive format. And then the other one, if you happen to pull for a second one, can go to Ultra League. But it's going to be the same situation where it's almost always worse than the normal Registeel. So you're not really missing out if you don't go for an Ultra League one as well. So yeah, just take it for what it's worth. If you are concerned, though, you can definitely look up the matchups on pvpoke.com and fish around and see what different IVs do different things there. So that's all I got to say about Shadow Registeel for now. If you got any questions on this content, of course, comment below. Let me know what's up, and I'll be happy to help you out. And if you enjoyed this kind of content, you want to see more like it, well, make sure to subscribe to SwagTips. SwagTips. I'd also like to give a special shout out to these Patreon supporters. If you want to support Swagman on Patreon, link in the description. Now we all know I'm not doing this video because of Shadow Registeel being part of this event. No. The real prize, the real excitement, is another increased chance at getting shiny Dedenne. Aw yeah, baby.